What you are about to watch is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute any type of advice. Always question the validity of what you see and what you hear. Viewer discretion is advised.
For today's session, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that today we're going to talk about a very interesting subject, provide several controversial examples, and provide even more controversial potential solutions. The bad news is that today is the end of the series, and we're not sure when the next series will come out. Some more good news. Our next series will focus on case studies to reinforce and better understand what we have illustrated in this series. But as I mentioned, we're not sure when the series will come out or what series will come out after that. The topic for today is one that Vadim Zealand brings up in his book of reality Transurfing, the pendulums of the world. I'm going to explain his version, Gary Douglas' version, and my version of these energy forces and why they do function as energy forces. Then I will explain 5 examples and present potential solutions for how to deal with these forces. Vadim Zealand is not the first one to talk about the pendulums or refer to them as pendulums. Mystic Samuel Auwerdim speaks about them in his early writings, The Law of the Pendulum, where he explains that the influence of the pendulum will have you react from one extreme to the other depending on which side of the equation it swings. Zealand explains that the charge of the pendulum is dependent on the level of importance that you give to the subject, situation, or entity. The level of importance you give to the motive of the pendulum will determine how much energy, time, and effort you put at work. Zealand suggests reducing importance as a solution, and the more people who reduce importance, the more likely the pendulum will crumble and eventually die. He mentions that outdated religions, abandoned cults, and forgotten fashions are good examples of dead pendulums. Gary Douglas calls pendulums distractor implants because their goal is to distract you from the real purpose of who you are in order to rob your energy effort that you could have placed delivering your destined purpose. They offer very powerful solutions that I will cover shortly. Opportunities of engagement and theories behind that is my version of pendulums. I call them that because I see pendulums presented as opportunities to engage. I call that because it is just an opportunity to engage, not an obligation, and depending on your level of engagement, it will determine how much effort, time, and care one will place on the engagement. My idea is in line with the 5 levels of attachment by Don Miguel Ruiz, where he describes that the more attached you are to the subject, the more devotion you will place on that subject. Although I have an extensive background in numerology, tarot, Kabbalah, and non-duality mysticism, I've decided to develop a less esoteric version of pendulums to demonstrate that the subject is much easier to understand, given that an opportunity of engagement is just an activity which does not require your energy efforts, and it does cease to be present if everyone moves on from that opportunity and dismisses it. This theory resembles my theory of the ego, where the ego is nothing more than an activity where the adherent raises their level of importance due to the false perception that deems it necessary in order to survive. For example, someone who's willing to show how manly and dominant he is at a bar in order to secure a temporary mate for the night does not realize that his behavior can lead to being challenged by another immature man who has the same false perception. The end result can range from anything such as a fight that leads them to both being kicked out from the bar for the night, to being hurt badly or ended up in a long prison sentence. The awareness of pendulums can save people suffering and struggle in life. So now to provide some examples of pendulums. One that everyone is all too familiar with is the pendulum of government. The pendulum is the entity behind the idea of governance. It creates laws and politics that must be obeyed or be prepared to face the consequences. These laws are policies and exceptions and prescribed strategies to determine who they pertain to and who and how these mandates can be lessened or circumvented, if at all. In the case of criminal law, no such exceptions may exist, and if they do, they are based on the intent and response to the events. For example, when someone fights back in self-defense and the initial aggressor exits this life in the process, or if the judge or jury determine that if it's the clause of self-defense, the case would take a much different direction than it would if it was determined that it was not in self-defense. I'm not a lawyer, so this is pure speculation and theory. A licensed and experienced attorney will be much more suitable to explain this complex subject. However, I hope that you can see and understand how this prominent and powerful pendulum of government becomes the regulator and judge of life at a large scale. So how does one overcome it? You must first understand that the pendulum has the right to exist as long as a collective agreement exists for its existence. This is why old government pendulums, such as the Greek and Roman pendulums, have ceased to exist. We must understand that all empire pendulums have an expiration date. We just don't know when that will be. But history does tell us that no pendulum lasts forever, at least not in the original form. Then it comes to the solution that Jesus gave, which is give the government what is of the government, and to God what is of God. During those times, Caesar was the government pendulum, and that pendulum has now expired. But the advice that Jesus has given is timeless. Not by placing too much importance on fighting the regulations, but instead understand them so you can play the game more efficiently and instead give your energy to the goal you want as an outcome. Your energy will be mostly for who you are becoming. You have a level of awareness that you're going to be providing some of your energy to the pendulum by following the laws and regulations, but instead of endlessly trying to fight them and having little energy for anything else, you are diverting your energy more efficiently by keeping yourself out of the trouble that comes with standing up to the pendulum. You know how things end, and those who stand against pendulums. This is not to say that injustices should be overlooked, but rather that we must have an understanding that if there is no government pendulum, there will be another pendulum taking over, and as we have seen in communist countries, where the pendulums become the great ultimate dictator. For that reason, we have decided to accept and be okay with the existence of the government pendulum. Time will tell how things go as it nears its imperial expiration. Until then, learn the tax code, pay your taxes, invest in growing your business, comply with regulations, and stay away from jail or anything that brings you trouble to your home. That is the current solution for dealing with the government pendulum. The next pendulum is the religion pendulum, which is strongly fading more and more every day, and the level of exposure that we're giving against the grifters, false prophets, and the injustices that they bring to the world. At some point, they had so much power that they could even destroy the other empires. The Knights Templars were removed by the church because the king and the church owed money and favors to them. The Templars were the first to create and use the banking system, a system that the king later stole from them. The Roman Empire was absorbed by the Catholic Church, which expanded its power over other countries and dictated its laws and levels of control, just as the government pendulum. In essence, the church functioned as a government pendulum and executed a refined strategy from the Roman Empire that they absorbed. The church made it all the way to Mexico, where they began to take control of its government until President Juarez legally separated them from the affairs of the government. The church pendulum is weakening every day because people are realizing that they don't need to give 10% of their earnings to them or even attend their services to find God, given that God is everywhere and we are the sons and daughters of God who have the right to seek God without an intermediary. So how does one overcome the religion pendulum? Stop attending and stop giving your 10% and it will cease to exist. I would just recommend to be careful because some of these pendulums actually serve a noble purpose. Not all churches try to rob you from 10% of your earnings, and they actually provide value and wisdom to your life. If you find these places, support them because their existence can lead to the exit of the grifters from this game. The next pendulum is the marriage pendulum. This pendulum is attached to the government and religion pendulum. The government pendulum benefits because when the family fails, reinforcement for divorce, child support, alimony, and child support is needed. The dissolution of marriage and alimony cannot exist if there's no marriage pendulum. The church is the reinforcer of marriage by pressuring and shaming those who refuse to marry. As we become more aware of our right to not legally marry, those church pendulums who insist on this tyrannical pressure over the masses will begin to fail. As awakened individuals, we understand that we do not need a license to love and to form relationships. We have nothing to prove to anyone, and the love we have today is the reward itself. And we take into account the reality that all relationships end. The end is either when one of the persons in the relationship exits his life, or when, for one reason or another, the relationship is terminated mutually, through deception, or by one of the partners. The marriage pendulum is so pervasive that the adherents understand no reason, and they find every reason and excuse to defend the idea of marriage because they are so indoctrinated and in such deep level of attachment, they become fanatics of the idea of marriage. The idea of marriage becomes their God, almost in the same way that most Christians worship the sun without even suspecting that such process is going on. The adherents of the marriage pendulum defend that pendulum through tooth and nail because they cling to the delusion that resulted from all the lies and fantasies they were promised that marriage will deliver. These people are likely to find themselves married, divorced, married again, divorced again, and so on, every time becoming easier and more normal to marry and divorce. This is why it is said that anyone who remarries is more likely to divorce again, because they have started to normalize the process. The marriage pendulum functions like any other pendulum, where it repeats the function of a slot machine, where it delivers the win to very few and grants the defeat to the majority in order to sustain itself. It has to have favorites, and it has to have adherents to get its energy from. For example, more than half of the marriages will end in divorce. A great part of the ones that do not, the adherents will remain married and miserable because they have invested too much time in the marriage, have properties that don't want to risk in losing to divorce, don't want to deprive their children from having a mother and a father, and so on. In some circumstances, if you look carefully, their sacrifice to stay together makes sense, and it is rather heroic to make a sacrifice of that magnitude, given that it won't be very pleasant to stay together, but they're more aware of what's at stake than those who are selfish and wish to make the relationship all about themselves. There is actually a very small percentage who are actually happily married and find themselves through that process until one of them dies. The vows make it sound like the delusion of staying together until death does them apart is realistic, but it is actually rare. However, those success stories are treated as case studies to get married. However, they don't take into account that not everyone wins the lottery. So what is the solution to defeat this pendulum? Given that this is a very voluntary pendulum, not getting married will be the best strategy and dismiss anyone who tells you otherwise. It is your choice and your right to not buy into the marriage delusion. A fourth pendulum would be the feminist pendulum. This pendulum acts under the pretense of human rights when in reality it's a Marxist movement where women are the oppressed and men are the oppressors. It mocks the idea behind masculinity as toxic when a man acts violent or angry and attempts to declare that men only have the right to be sad, but any other emotion is unacceptable. This hate group pendulum uses derogatory terms such as mansplaining to judge men as being the only gender that is condescending when attempting to explain terms to a woman. This pendulum has changed the entertainment industry by creating indoctrination through movies and shows, which in many instances result in flops at the box office because people are becoming aware of the scam. The pendulum attempts to convince impressionable young women, usually in their college years, to put off the idea of forming a family and rather pursue a career and not settle for a man who has less than she does. The consequences of this lie is that although women in their early years do not struggle to find partners, in their late years, usually after 45, the struggle begins. The pendulums can be destructive for men who get caught in the middle of false accusations like Johnny Depp until he won his lawsuit, which was a huge victory against this deceptive pendulum. So how does one defeat this pendulum? By not being involved with this type of people and not forming relationships with them. When all the relationships begin to fail, the movement will begin to die out. This is something that is already beginning to happen. The last pendulum that I will mention will be the anti-feminist pendulum. There are various degrees of this pendulum in the aspect that many groups have taken this stance. These groups range from pickup communities, which can lead to issues of false accusations due to their slimy behavior. There's also red pill community, which has become sort of a cult over the past years. The community has many valid and important points, but can also lead to dissatisfaction and obsessing over what they call female nature. Such group is probably good to look, learn, and move on. In the case of the red pill, it is okay to look, but not stare for too long. The black pill community are like the red pill with the exception that they emphasize that all that women care about are looks, which in many occasions is proven to be true, but there are exceptions to those cases. The danger in this group lies in the level of hopelessness sold to the adherents, who may view themselves as the unfortunate, not gifted with good looks. There are other groups such as men going the wrong way and the incels. These two groups actually have a strong level of intelligence, but they spend too long finding reasons to hate women, which in turn can lead to actually desiring women even more. If you look at their Facebook groups, you quickly realize that a lot of the time is spent complaining about the behavior of women. If you plan to learn from them, please have a solid plan shortly after your brief observation. There are good ideas shared in those communities, which makes them hard to exit later, but it is best to exercise caution. So how does one overcome this pendulum? Given that it is a very informative pendulum that does ask you for devotion in return, the best idea is to remember not everything that you're told is true. If you want to learn a few things from this pendulum, you will, but remember that having an exit strategy is imperative when dealing with this particular pendulum, because like feminism, it can become very addictive to the adherent. Now that we've covered 5 prominent pendulums of the world, I'd like to share with you that we've had conversations with Digital Fury, and we will be helping them create a program that can teach you how to start a non-traditional ministry as a nonprofit. Google can grant $10,000 per month in Google Ad credit, and Microsoft up to $3,000 when they open their program applications. Please note that Microsoft only opens their programs on specific dates. There are other grants that can work together on learning how to run businesses by creating an online non-traditional ministry, which can be a great experience and can lead to creating other type of businesses in the future. This is one of the most interesting entrepreneurial opportunities right now. We're still running up the test processes and case studies, so we will allow Digital Fury to announce their launch through us as soon as we have more information on the details. The program that we do have going on right now and are ready for our classes that go very well with what we have learned here is Freedom 320, which is all about finding personal and financial freedom, a spiritual reconciliation training, which prepares you for spiritual counseling and guidance, Tarot levels 1 through 3, which prepare you for spiritual counseling and guidance with an emphasis on tarot. The next one is Functional Facilitation Achievement, which is behavioral based and teaches you how to generate the motivation, habits, and realizations to find success. We also have 3 books. One is on how to understand and use your emotions as intuitions. The other one is about how to rechannel hate and violence into creativity. And the last one is an entertaining set of stories on strange conspiracies. Even our sponsors at Awaken AVA are very pleased with the work we have done, and we are very pleased to have them as our sponsors. They are one of the very few programs in Oregon to help license in the field of consciousness. They're approved by 2 regulating bodies in Oregon to provide educational requirements for licensing. Check them out. They're doing an amazing thing. It has been a pleasure having you. If you want to take any of our courses or get our books, please feel free. If you just want to donate, we thank you for that too. If donating takes food from your table, please don't do it and instead share a video with others. May God bless you.